Right, welcome everyone to Cabinet. Today on the 24th of February 2026. Item 1 is attendance. We've got Sue, Fiona, Joe, Peter and myself here. Welcome Mandy and David online. Item 2 is apologies. Apologies from Richard Clark this morning. Anything else to note there? Okay, have we gone to declarations of interest? Anything there, Delith? Okay, thanks, Delith. We're not aware of any declarations. If anything does come up during the meeting, then feel free to ask for advice. So that brings us to item 4, which is the minutes of the meeting from the 13th of January this year. Just to confirm those minutes, everyone happy with those? Show of hands. Yep, that's carried. Item 5 is the action sheets. It's at page 19 on the agendas. I don't believe there's anything to note here. No. So we move straight then to item 6, which is the budget for 2026-2027 and the medium-term financial plan. I'll just wait for Andrew and Rob to come down. Welcome both.
Good morning, Leader. Good morning, Cabinet. Today, before us, we've got the paper about the budget. This is part of the formal process of the budget being presented to Cabinet for your onward approval to Council next week. If you recall, you saw a version of this paper a month ago as we explained some of the detail behind the budget and the assumptions being used. I'll hand over to Rob now, who will give you an update of things that have happened since we last saw it.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Good morning, all. I'll just run through quite quickly some of the changes since the last version you've seen. Also, just to highlight that a lot of the content of the report is similar, if not identical, to the report that went to scrutiny only a couple of weeks ago. So you may be familiar with it already. We last met as Cabinet to discuss the budget on the 13th of January. At that point, we were talking about residual headroom of about just over £1 million. That was before the final settlement was announced, and that was based on an assumption around what that final settlement would reflect. That was then confirmed on the 20th of January. As expected, that resulted in an average 4.5% uplift across all local authorities in Wales, but actually Torfaen's uplift was 4.7%, so that sort of followed the pattern of being slightly above average in the last few years based on the data that underpins the formula. So what that meant is headroom, instead of 1.06 million, actually of 1.627 million, and obviously with that an opportunity for Cabinet to consider areas of investment. They're then set out in the table on the second page of the report. You can see it all there in terms of the respective amounts. So investments in the Phoenix project, family conflict service, additional apprentices, support for people who are regarded as NEET, increase in community capacity building and additional ALN funding for schools. Just to highlight that on the family conflict service one, actually that's a proposal to use earmarked reserves. So it doesn't represent a call upon that available headroom, but is a new investment, and that being funded through reserves is on the basis that it's anticipated to ultimately be a sort of invest-to-save type initiative. So taking those investments of 1.176 million into account, that left sufficient headroom to be able to reduce the proposed council tax increase from 4.95% down to 3.95%. And that's what's then being factored into the papers for Council next week and has been consulted upon. Speaking of the consultation, paragraph 3.5 and 3.6 gives an overview there of the activity undertaken. a range of activity as usual, and the survey responses specifically are outlined in Appendix 2 to the report. I think, as paragraph 3.6 says, the numbers are relatively low, and also there's quite varied feedback depending on the form in which it was given. So to what extent we can take clear conclusions away from that is difficult to judge, but that feedback is there and obviously has been passed on to you as required. As I mentioned at the outset, cross-cutting scrutiny considered these proposals on the 3rd of February. Overall, the committee confirmed they were satisfied with the proposed budget position. There was a specific recommendation around setting aside money for the deal, and the proposal in response to that recommendation is to consider that as part of closing the financial year 25-26 position. So should there be a positive variance at the end of the year, that is something that can be considered in terms of transfers to reserves. The other recommendations weren't specifically about the proposals themselves, but were more about the committee being made aware should any specific risks materialise. Paragraph 3.9, I don't propose to run through the list, but that gives the sort of headlines in terms of what this budget buys, if you like, what it provides, and that list will also be in the council report for next week. In terms of risks, where we go from here, a lot of the risks that we would have talked about have been put to bed insofar as the final settlement has already been announced. In recent years, it's come after the budget's been approved, so there's always been that little bit of risk. That's not the case this year. So the remaining risks are to do with specific grants where we still don't have, as is normally the case, we don't have specific local authority allocations, just all Wales allocations. We obviously don't have an agreed pay award for next year for either teachers or non-teaching staff, so there's always a risk regarding that, but we feel we've been fairly prudent in our approach to funding whatever pay award is awarded. And also just to highlight that there is an element of use of earmarked reserves within these proposals, albeit we feel they're prudent and appropriate and not risking the sustainability or resilience of the authority financially. So that's the proposed budget for 26-7. There's also information on the medium-term financial plan, which has now been updated as we would normally do at this time of year. So we review our kind of core assumptions and just see where we sit overall in terms of that 4-year horizon. So in terms of aggregate external finance, i.e. our core funding from Welsh Government, we're still working on a 3% increase, which was our assumption previously. Same with council tax. We're using a modelling assumption of 4.95%, simply for the purpose of producing and reviewing the MTFP. Pay inflation is at 3% in each year. Pension inflation is negative in the first 2 years, which is reflective of the position we've got for 26-7, in light of all pension funds generally performing far better in recent years and actually allowing those employee contribution rates to reduce. Energy inflation at 5%. We've also factored in service-specific pressures where appropriate, either being demand in areas such as adult social care or contract inflation in areas such as waste. We factored in where appropriate potential grant funding fallout, and we've modelled the anticipated pupil number movements and reflected that in the MTFP as well. So taking that all into account leaves a gap of over the 4 years of 10.2 million. That is slightly more than identified at this point last year, but not significantly so, and is significantly better than the position would have been 5-10 years ago. So, broadly positive, albeit still presents a challenge. I think overall, though, and 5.6 sets out some of the areas of mitigation that will be explored. I think there's reasonable confidence that, given recent track record and that position as it is, that it should be possible to achieve a balanced position over those 4 years and in each of those years individually. But obviously, we'll keep those assumptions under review, and as and when anything changes, obviously we will have to take stock at that point. And as usual, we'll be reviewing the MTFP position constantly throughout the year for any changes that do arise. The final part of the report just gives an overview of reserves. As you can see, it's a forecast just up to the end of this financial year. The council report will go further than that, but a reduction is forecast at the moment. That's not a surprise in any way. That's based on previous approvals and anticipated use of reserves. But clearly, if the in-year 25-6 position is more positive, that will give an opportunity to bolster reserves or not to draw down on reserves as originally planned. So, we'd like to think that that's the worst case scenario, and actually reserves will be a bit healthier than that come the end of the year. That was everything on the report. Happy to take any questions.
Okay. Thank you, Rob. If I just come in first and then open it up for any questions. I'd like to start by thanking members and officers for the calm council-wide approach to the budget this year. As always, these reports come at a culmination of putting a budget together, but it's a budget that I will be pleased to take to council next week and propose it, because I think it's a remarkable budget that's been put together in a difficult time. So I'd like to thank officers for the calm, year-round way that we approach the budget, the fact that we approach the budget across this council, not as warring factions competing for meat off the bone, but we work together to try and work out what is the best thing for our residents and for services as a whole. I very much welcome the increase in funding for local services that's been delivered by two Labour governments working together to invest in those local services. Very often budgets can seem very dry. Very often they're talked about in terms of council funding. But we know that in reality, this isn't about funding the council. This is about funding the vital local services that people rely on. Over 70% of our money goes on schools and social care. And that's caring for vulnerable children and adults, making sure that our young people in schools have the best possible chance to succeed. So those are two key priorities for us. But then elsewhere in the community, from community services that people care about, from libraries and youth and play services, to environmental services, like refuse collections, and continuing to raise that rate of recycling to be more sustainable. And also, of course, addressing the challenge and the opportunities of net zero, and making ourselves more sustainable as a council and leading our way in the community as we try to do. So that's the reality of what this represents in terms of council budgets. It's not about us within this building, it's about the communities beyond that building. So I very much welcome the increase in funding and think it will make a real difference to the budget we can put to council next week. That extra funding enables us to do three things next week. First of all, it enables us to propose a lower council tax rise. We recognise that people's budgets are stretched. We've tried very hard over the course of this council term to reduce the rises in council tax as much as we can. Torfaen now has the fourth lowest council tax in Wales, and we've had the lowest rises cumulatively over the last 4 years, which means that someone on a Band D property is paying £150 less in Torfaen than had we risen them by the average across Wales. So we recognise our duty to try and help as much as we can limit the rises and the impact on people's budgets. But of course, the flip side to that is that we have to put services in a sustainable position and make sure that they aren't left bereft of funding. Because the other thing people tell us is that they don't want services to close or services to be diminished. I'm proud during this council term that we've put schools at the front and centre of our priorities. I believe that schools are the ultimate early intervention and prevention service, after all, and there are staff in our schools who wouldn't be there had we not prioritise revenue funding for schools. I know schools still struggle to set budgets. I know it can never be enough. I want to do more, but I think we've got a track record across this council term of really prioritising schools' revenue budgets. There's a challenge as well with capital too that we know about, and we're trying to address, but I think schools in Torfaen aren't in the position that we see elsewhere in the country of having to run deficit budgets because of the approach that we've taken. Also on ALN, that's an issue where there's huge demand at the moment, additional learning needs, and that's a responsibility that I know weighs heavily on everyone's shoulders in this room. I'm glad that we've been able to put extra funding to try and meet some of that need and try and do our best by children with additional learning needs in Torfaen, because that's an important duty of ours. On roads, there's investment. Again, you know, that it requires multi-year investment. That's the story across the country, not just in Torfaen. There's a real backlog to try and address, but we're trying to do that year on year by putting more money in. Now we've got the chance to do that after 15 years of having funding for that stripped away. So hopefully that will start to to make a real difference, because I recognise the frustration when there are potholes on our roads, but I also recognise that the need to invest in other parts of services too. I'm really pleased about the early intervention and prevention topics that are mentioned in paragraph 3.9. I think those are key intervention to try and help, as you say, children not in educational training or people who've gone through particular traumas in their life and have particular needs. So I very much welcome that. I welcome the funding for caring for the vulnerable, and I welcome the steps that we're taking on fair pay for staff further down the pay scales in our organisation. People often talk about councils as if the only people who work in them are councillors. Of course, that's not true. Most of our staff work hard to deliver services on the front line, whether it's in our schools, in social care or in community environmental services. This budget will enable us to address the pay structure lower down to not only meet the foundation living wage rate, but also to give over 1,000 key staff on lower pay grades that pay rise as we strip away spinal column points 2, 3 and 4 and move people up. So that's people like teaching assistants, it's people like canteen assistants in our schools, it's people like the drivers and the loaders who collect refuse and recycling, social care workers and things like that can benefit from that approach. So I welcome that as well. And lastly, I welcome the chance this budget gives us to take a prudent approach for future years. I've never believed in setting knee-jerk budgets that look very popular on the surface but give the council a headache in future years. I believe this budget is a sustainable budget that can put us in a good, prudent position for future years. Take some of the approaches that have been taken to pay and to pensions, for example. I think those are responsible decisions for the long term, not just popular decisions in the short term. So I very much welcome that. So I'll be pleased to bring this council to this budget for council's approval next week, and I look forward to the debate. Are there any questions members have? Peter first.
Thank you, Leader. I also welcome this budget, and I'm particularly pleased that we've managed to reduce the council tax and at the same time increase investment in services. I've just got one small little query in relation to para 3.8 under service areas, Rob. Housing benefit subsidy, it's not large in the scale of things, but it's gone up from 573,000 to 887. I just wondered if you could explain a little bit. It seems quite a large increase, although in the scheme of things it isn't large in terms of the overall budget.
No, thank you for the question. And yeah, like I say, when you look at that net budget, it is a big increase percentage-wise. I suppose the other thing to state, as well as it being small in the grand scheme of the council's budget, it's also small in the grand scheme of housing benefit activity, expenditure and whatnot. It's basically to do with the fact that within housing benefit there's effectively a cap on the amount that can be covered through housing benefit subsidy. It's been a particular issue for a number of authorities in recent years, given the sort of sharp increase in homelessness and the use of temporary accommodation and perhaps less conventional forms of temporary accommodation compared to previous years, things like B&Bs and hotels, certainly in the wake of the pandemic. So a lot of authorities are still grappling with that and recovering from that, and to some extent we're no different. And so that increase is recognising in effect the element of costs that can't be covered through that reimbursement from the Department for Work and Pensions through the subsidy mechanism. So yeah, that's what that is. So I've said it looks like a big increase, but actually it's just reflecting the element of the total cost that can't be covered through the subsidy. So in the grand scheme of housing benefit, it's not huge, but it is still something that is a challenge and something that's trying to be addressed through the service as well. So that ultimately, hopefully, that can come back down to a more reasonable figure in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for the explanation around the engagement on the budget. very interesting and reassuring. But we are, as a council, I think, expanding the range of our consultation mechanisms through Torfaen Deal and in other ways. So how will the feedback from those wider consultation exercises enrich next year's budget consultation, so that we make sure that we're taking full use of all of that consultation feedback from wherever it comes that's pertinent to the budget?
Thank you for the question. How we engage our public is a very critical question for the councillor, and you'll know as councillors because you'll have that engagement. One of the things that we've done recently is the Citizens' Assembly, so it's a new process that we've run across both councils, but that's a very powerful tool to enable people to explain their views, to have a conversation about the arrangements, so that part of that conversation was about the deal, and members from the Citizens' Assembly came and spoke to the Scrutiny Committee a couple of weeks ago, gave a very powerful evidence of their impact. So it's things like that will help engage our residents and enable us to feed into the process of setting the budget. So there's a whole raft of arrangements being put forward, and the whole concept of the deal is about having that conversation. Stephen described it, the social contract with our residents. So that is a two-way process, and we need very much to listen to the feedback we've been given from our residents and our community groups about how we deal with things. So it's part of the ongoing process. As we describe the budget, we do the budget for 11.5 months of the year. The engagement with our residents runs a similar time frame.
Okay, any other questions? If not, then we move to the recommendations, which are at paragraph 8.1 on the report. It's recommended...
Sorry, Leader.
Oh, sorry. David,
yeah,
sorry.
Sorry, we were now very nearly done. Yeah, mine is just, you know, just to chime in with everyone else, really, saying, you know, really pleased that we were able to have such a kind of a measured budget. Again, you know, like Pete said, you know, listening to residents and bringing down that council tax where possible, whilst also protecting, you know, those services that you've referred to, Anthony, education and you know, in my world of things, social care. You know, like, it can't be sort of understated that we've really protected both those areas, despite them not being the most conspicuous, you know, for as long as I've been a councillor, really. So it's something very understated, but I'm very proud of that. My question is around those investments. I know there's some context in the report around those investments that we're able to make this year. I wondered if the relevant chief officer was there to be able to provide just a little bit of verbal context to each of those investments, just so, because I think there's something to be proud of, quite honestly, and I think that they, you know, there's something we should definitely give a little bit more time to, just to you know, to advertise to the public what we're doing.
Thanks, David. Shall I take that as a suggestion for Tuesday at council? That with each of those, we get one of the chief officers to talk through the rationale behind each investment and the difference we hope it can make. Because that will, I think, provide that useful context next time. And you make a very good point about services like social care. Very often they can be quite conspicuous services because by their very nature they are confidential, whether it's looked after children or vulnerable adults, you know, and they're not delivered with a loud hailer. So they're conspicuous to most of the public who don't rely on them, but for those who do, they're vital and life-changing services, and without them they wouldn't be able to lead fulfilling or independent lives. So that's very much our dilemma, isn't it, as councillors? I think throughout the country is that we run some very conspicuous and universal, very inconspicuous and universal services on one hand, but we have to balance the funding of them against some, you know, quite sensitive services that most people don't encounter, but that have a profound effect on those who do. So how we grapple with that dilemma, whilst at the same time grappling with the dilemma of keeping costs down, is the balancing act that's at the core of every budget that we set. And I'm, you know, pleased that we've got people, you know, such as yourself in this organisation who recognise the value of those services, because, as I say, they do have a huge impact on people's lives, and their ability to live independently and fulfilling lives. Okay, are we happy then to move to the recommendations? They are, as I said, at paragraph, sorry, I flipped back in the report now, paragraph 8.1. It's recommended that firstly, that the final budget proposals for 2026-27, as outlined in the report, are approved and recommended to Council for approval. That secondly, the revised medium-term financial plan is noted. And that thirdly, the position in respect of reserves and financial standing is noted. Have a show of hands in favour. That's carried unanimously. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you to Stephen and Rob, and to all the other officers for their leadership, and to members too for their involvement, especially noting the involvement of scrutiny members too. I look forward to the debate next week. That brings us then to item 7, which is the Torvine Local Growth Fund Investment Plan. I'm going to hand over initially to Jo.
Thank you, Leader. So Torvine Local Growth Fund Investment Plan. So since Brexit, we've had a series of UK government funds to succeed EU funding. The Community Renewal Fund, followed by the Shared Prosperity Funding. UK government have now established a 3-year local growth fund to kickstart economic growth and regeneration. The 3-year fund will deliver against both the Welsh Government Economic Mission and UK Government Agenda for Growth, and aims to have a joined-up approach to regional economic activity to ensure investments complement and support each other to target economic development. Decision-making on how the local growth fund is invested is now restored to Welsh Government, which is in line with how previous EU funding was distributed. Whilst the funding is most welcome, as other local authorities, we do have some concerns around delivery in a limited timescale, a reduction in overall funding and the capital and revenue split. Feedback has been provided to Welsh Government via the consultation process. I'm also aware of the good work of our partners, the Industrial Communities Alliance, who have prepared detailed papers to press for fair funding. Whilst we know the allocation for Wales and for the region, the individual local authority allocations have not been finalised. Our proposed investment plan is based on confident calculations using previous funding formulas. Our allocation will support delivery of our economic development and regeneration priorities and the delivery of our emerging blueprint for growth strategy. The investment plan includes funding to deliver an engineering hub in the north of the borough. This is a key vision, and it's grown from the work of Torvine Strategic Economic Forum to meet a local skills gap and inspire our future engineers. If agreed today, officers will finalise and submit the local growth investment plan and confirm the final programme of activities and projects. I'll hand to Greg MacDonald, our Interim Head of Economy and Place, for more detail.
Thanks, Councillor Vaughan. Just to add to that then, obviously we're in the process of transition between the SPF and the Local Growth Fund. There is a lot of uncertainty in terms of the information that's come out of the Welsh Government. We had a letter of comfort last year, which I think was the exact opposite. I think it didn't give us much comfort in terms of knowing what funds we're getting, but we are expecting an announcement this afternoon in the Welsh Government, so there's due to be an announcement this afternoon. I'm not sure that will be along the lines of the letter of comfort, or whether it will actually be some firm numbers to say what's happening. So we'll wait and see what happens this afternoon and update on that. I think moving forward then, it's to confirm, you've got the draft investment plan in the Appendix 1, and just to outline just some of the detail in paragraph 3.7 of the report is we're assuming that we're getting £6.3 million for next year, and I think that's based on a capital split between capital and revenue of 70% for capital, which is 4.4 million, and 30 for revenue, which is just under 2 million. This has been calculated by applying the percentage we got last year as part of the SPF against the known allocation for the region, which is just under £80 million for next year. So overall, we're seeing a reduction from last year for SBF to this year on our assumptions of 25%. So that's a key issue, I think, in general, that everyone is concerned about in terms of a reduction in the overall spend. We've got, as I say, you've got the investment plan outlined in the appendix. You've got a list of projects in 3.10, which just really gives you an indication to what areas we're putting a focus on as part of our indicative plan. And those fall within 3 areas. One, there's a continuation of existing initiatives from the SBF that we're doing well and having a great impact, such as those to help the local economy and new enterprises and growing enterprises. There's some specific interventions, as you mentioned, the engineering approach, the springboard extension to what we're doing in terms of that sector, and that will help jobs and employment across that sector, which has been identified as part of our work with our partners. And there's a generic approach as well. So we've talked about border type programs around town centres and site assembly, which haven't been identified yet in terms of exactly what we're doing, but that gives us scope to actually work that out as we move forward with the blueprint for growth, and ultimately that document will shape what we do over the coming years. So that's moving on to the implications here. Obviously, this investment is good news in broad terms with regard to add to our ambitions of improving the economy and the quality of life for local people, and it will build on existing grants that we've got already from the Levelling Up Fund and the Pride in Place initiatives. And then also, actually, the other implication we look from SBF is that because we employed a lot of staff, there was an issue around that. And in terms of when that fund came to an end, we had to look at alternative sources of funding, which I think you heard from the last report we have for a lot of those initiatives. So we've looked at that internally and put a focus on those important initiatives that do improve the quality of life and employment for local people. But that is a lesson we'll learn going forward in terms of the way in which we invest that money. And I think that interesting split between capital and a higher percentage of capital funds, it could potentially outline an opportunity to look at a strategy where we invest to actually get an income. So that could actually help with the longer term to actually look at those ongoing costs. So even though it is a tough split between the capital funding and the revenue funding, I think there could be opportunities there which we need to explore over the coming months. So the risk around that is just saying that I think there's been a spotlight already, but there is a concern between a national level and a local level, and there is concerns there could be, and we'll hear this afternoon, a national and regional type funds and initiatives that will top slice what we get. So it will be, we'll have to work out if that happens exactly the way in which those schemes work on the ground. Ideally, what we want is all the investment to come to the grassroots level and come to our level and enable us to actually adjust and flex to the need that's on the ground. Having those larger schemes at the top level makes it very hard to adjust and flex to the actual needs you've got in your area. And we've mentioned before about the risk around the level of the split of all the funds between the capital funds and revenue funds. So that's those risk implications. The next steps, subject to approval, is to get the investment plan, get it up to speed and get all the information once that's out, and get it to a point where it's ready to go. Then what we'll get back from the position of government will be an agreement to sign, which we'll then look to sign that, and then we'll confirm the working way forward in terms of the way in which that grant funding will be are taken forward in terms of updates back to the council and to the cabinet as well, but also the way in which it's going to work on the ground as well. Again, we've got the SPF structures in place, so a lot of that will be there again, but just updated to reflect what we need to do as part of the new programme and anything that will come out of that. And then we need just to look at the way in which we start to drive those initiatives forward, and then we look at what we're going to do in years 2 and 3 as well. So that's all partly what we need to do as next steps. So happy to take any points of clarification, and it's back to you, Chair.
Great, thanks both. Any questions, Sue?
Thank you, Greg. Just a couple of questions from me. First of all, I recognise the need for speedy deployment of this capital allocation, which, having reversed from the previous scenario of 30-70 to 70-30 for capital, will put some pressure on us. But I'm really keen to understand how we deploy that capital in a way that supports the wider work we're doing to make best use of community assets, whether they're the council's community assets or community-owned or business-owned assets. You know, just that coordination across the programme of what Torfaen needs and where it needs it. If there is this pressure to spend capital within this period, I'd be reluctant to see it narrowly constrained to existing economic development type facilities and existing projects. So how are we going to make sure that wider consideration informs this spend?
Yeah. We've got the asset management strategy plan that's in place now for the council, so I think that will form a starting point, because a part of that is a way in which we look at what we've got and what's out there and the opportunities. So I think within that type of picture we'll look at developing a sub-plan to look at what we could do next year and the way in which that builds on what we're doing already. So it won't just be on its own, it's on its own type of initiative. It will have to link to that, and it will build on the investments that we're doing already. So I think there's a range of criteria around that we'll use, but that will come back here. So you'll see that as a plan to say, this is how we think this acquisition or this this approach to a site assembly will work. So that will work that we'll do in the next few weeks and months.
Thank you. Sorry, will it also dovetail with the work that communities are doing in relation to identifying community assets?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll time that, but.
Yeah, happy to come in there. It will. It absolutely will. Certainly around some of that town centre improvements, the place-making approach that's been taken around that town centre brings together the whole capital estate that makes that place function. So that's your community provision, your social care provision, your education provision, as well as the business provision, to see how that all interlinks. So from a town centre perspective, absolutely. But it's really important not to see this programme in isolation either. There are other support mechanisms for bringing community buildings up to the level that we'd want to see them. There's been significant investment made, for example, in the green infrastructure space over communities in recent years, and there are other opportunities linked to that we look to tap into. So it's very much part of our plan to make sure that there's alignment between capital spend on community facilities and that capital spend on economic development that we have going forward.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up what you mentioned around regional programmes and saying you're hoping as much as possible will come to the local level. And I understand that thinking, but it is true, isn't it, that sometimes regional programmes are the best way to meet local imperatives and to meet our local needs. So if that slightly risky area of, well, what if there's a lot of regional spending comes about, are we agile enough to put the capacity that we need to put into those regional projects so that we can advocate for Torfaen's needs and really lobby for Torfaen's needs? So have we got that agility and capacity to do that if we need to?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll make it work. And there can be some good initiatives but I think the problem is the lack of flexibility you have within these schemes. And I think I'm quite nervous in recent years they're getting more inflexible in that sense. So I think that's my concern. But we'll see what comes out. And if it is, and ideally we want it done at a local level because we know what the needs, demands are in a local area. But if there is a regional or national initiative, then we can make that work, yeah.
Great, thanks. I guess that's our our request, isn't it, for that certainty and flexibility so that we can make sure we sort of tie in external grant-funded work with our overall ambitions and priorities, especially when you think about what we're talking about next, the deal, our Marmot priorities. And that's our frustration sometimes, that we want to do that more. The other frustration, of course, from the public is that they don't really see the difference between capital and revenue and grant-funded and core-funded work. And therefore we get a lot of sort of, you know, what about this, what about that? And if it doesn't tie in with the grant, then we can't just spend it on whatever we like. I'm not suggesting we should be able to spend it on whatever we like, but that flexibility, I guess, stops us being boxed in what we can do.
I mean, that flex, we try and flex as much as we can because we've got to meet local needs, and that varies not only between, authority areas, but within authority areas as well. So that flex is absolutely key. I think we do a good job at a local level in terms of getting that flex, but as you're absolutely right, we have to work within the rules and criteria. But we will, we're trying to. We're making the case at a regional level to make sure that things are coming down, but also we're making a case at a local level just to ensure that all this embeds within our area, and that's all part of the deal work.
Okay, great. Any more? Oh, Joe.
Yeah, just listening to, what we were talking about, how we use our allocation, and it has to be within the criteria, doesn't it? I think it's quite important that actually we come back to Cabinet. So can I propose that we come back to Cabinet? So a 6th recommendation, really, that we come back to Cabinet when we know what our allocation is. And at the moment, our investment plan is draft. So when we know what our final investment plan looks like, bring that back to Cabinet so that can be made public as well. Thank you.
Mandy, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Leader. Just following on from what you were saying, Anthony, about people's expectations. They see extra capital coming in and think, oh right, we can spend it on X, Y, and Z. And given the people's views on potholes and the state of the roads and everything, obviously we have separate funding streams, and we've put the extra money in for the next 4 years for additional roads. It was just some clarity, really, to give to people to say that, this funding stream would not be able to sort all our road problems out, really. And if there is any, when we're working with the infrastructure, taking priority 4 into account.
I mean, that's something we obviously will do as part of the comms around this. So, and also, as we just say, there's an element of this will be a call for a range of projects, so that will be an engagement as well as part of the deal. So, it's all part of that type of process. It will be ongoing just to make sure people are aware. But you can do all the comms in the world. We're still going to get those emails in the same way, filling all the holes in the road with this money, and we just go back and that helps in a way because we can then explain it.
Great. Right. So I note that 6th recommendation then that we come back to Cabinet when we know what the funding is and we have the plans to take forward. So it's very much a work in progress. With that, is everyone happy to move to the recommendations? They are that Cabinet firstly approves the Torvine Outline Growth Fund Investment Plan 26-27 as detailed in Appendix 1. Secondly, provides delegated authority to the Acting Joint Director for Economy in Place in consultation with the Executive Member of Economy, Skills and Regeneration to finalise the Torvine Local Government Investment Plan for 26-27 and the subsequent 2 years ready for formal submission. Thirdly, provides delegated authority to the Strategic Director of Resources in consultation with the Executive Member for Corporate Governance and Resources to sign the final Torvine Local Growth Fund Investment Plan and associated funding agreements for 26-27 and the subsequent 2 years ready for formal submission. Fourthly, approves Torvine Council becoming the accountable body for the Torvine programme. Fifthly, approves the Section 151 officer becomes the accountable officer for the programme. And then sixthly, that we come back to Cabinet when we have that final certainty on what the funding is and what our plans are going forwards. A show of hands in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you both for your work on that. Greg and to Christina as well for her work on this, and to Joe. Okay, so that brings us to item 8, which is the Torvine deal, communication and engagement with the community piece. And if I can bring in Neil Jones.
Good morning, Leader. Good morning, Cabinet. I'll introduce this report on the deal today and provide an update following the end of citizens' assemblies and our recent scrutiny activity. Through regular executive team member engagement with heads of service and managers and staff across the organisation, the deal mindset is already starting to influence the business of the Council, and this could be seen in the recent delivery plan report that went to scrutiny. The report before you today starts with our key messages and contains the vision and aim of the deal. The vision being for a future without inequality, where everyone thrives in a fair, inclusive and resilient community. And the aim of the deal is to create lasting change by building trust, fostering shared responsibility and driving innovation through strong collaboration between the Council, residents and our partners. This is why the deal underpins the transformation strategy across Torvine and is deeply aligned with Marmot principles, which are the lens through which we'll reduce health inequalities across our borough. In short, the deal is our new way of working, sharing power and responsibility with communities so we can prevent problems earlier and build local resilience. Feedback from our scrutiny activity and from the citizens' assemblies have informed our approach to our engagement, our choice of language and our communication approach around the deal. The purpose of this report today is to ask Cabinet to approve the next steps in the ongoing communication and engagement strategy for the deal and to provide Cabinet with an update on the feedback from the survey via residents from the deal Citizens' Assembly and to approve the principles of the deal and most recent recommendations from Scrutiny Committee. As background in point 3 of the report outlines that the deal is part of a three-pronged approach to how the Chief Executive would describe it as race in a different race, to address the needs of our community by embedding community action in Council policy. The report reminds us that Torvine and Blaenau Gwent are the first councils in Wales to make Marmot principles our core purpose, the first councils in Wales to federate, resulting in joint officers and closer working with Blaenau Gwent, and the first councils in Wales to embark on a deal with residents. Underpinning the deal are the 5 missions, spanning early years, lifelong learning, community leadership, thriving places and shared power. Together, these missions will unlock the full potential of community-led action, strengthen the social fabric of Torvine and deliver lasting improvements in health, well-being and economic resilience across the borough. As per Scrutiny's previous recommendations, these missions have been tested with multiple stakeholders and they have evolved. In point 4 of the report on consultation, we set out our multi-layered engagement approach. To support the development of the Torvine deal, it was vital to engage key stakeholders. In the report, we outline staff engagement, public engagement, the forums and community groups we've been to, member engagement, partner engagement and external engagements. And it finally sets out the proposals for business engagement with the business teams in Torvine and Blaenau Gwent about to survey businesses on a BGT deal for business, and they're about to attend numerous business events in key locations. The communications team have also created a significant number of assets to raise awareness of the deal throughout the process, including posters, flyers, slide decks, bulletins, Teams background, email signatures, easy-read documents, and hopefully, over the recent weeks, you will have seen some of the video case studies and physical case studies that we've developed with local community groups. And that's an ongoing process now that will continue to gather those excellent examples of communities taking action for themselves. Point 4.3 of the report covers the details of our citizens' assemblies. The assemblies took place in January and February, facilitated by local partnerships. The assemblies are an established process to capture experiences that are not always heard and empower residents to have their say in shaping the future. 12,000 households were contacted to join the assembly, with a company called Sortition managing the recruitment and selection process, and they're a respected and independent specialist in this field. From the hundreds of people who expressed an interest in taking part, 40 were selected, representing a good cross-section of the borough from different places and demographics. During the 3 sessions during January and February, participants were asked to address the key question: what principles should guide the new relationship and the new way of working to deliver our shared ambition? The format of these sessions was to hear evidence from local partners and community groups, then debate and discuss the findings relating to their own experience. They then reached consensus on the key points, and these will be presented back to the council and the community in the form of future policy and ways of working. We had numerous attendees and speakers over the course of the workshop, including our leader and our Chief Executive, Professor Tracy Daskovich, Director of Public Health in Gwent, Amy Morris from the Torfaen Voluntary Alliance, Ron Ford from a local litter picking group representative, Scott Rolfe from Halo Leisure, Catherine Love from Brunavon Community Housing, Dave Leach, our Deputy Chief Executive, Jason O'Brien, our Strategic Director for Children and Families, and Councillor David Williams in his role as Scrutiny Chair. The Assembly's in principle, agreed the principles, and as background in point 3, the report outlines, the Assembly agreed the principles in principles, and those principles are set out in the report. Principle 1 was to work with the communities, not for them. Principle 2, to use a wide range of communication. Principle 3 was to build trust through accountability. Principle 4, to strengthen community ownership and collective responsibility. Principle 5, to empower communities through partnership. Principle 6, to minimise barriers to participation. Principle 7, to pursue environmental sustainability. The Assembly members voted overwhelmingly in favour of each of these principles. And we have invited the Assembly to reconvene in a year's time to monitor our progress against the deal, and we'll keep them engaged throughout the year. Point 4.4 of the report starts with the headlines and detail from the survey, which concluded at the end of 2025. Residents were invited to take part on the Council's engagement platform, Get Involved. The deal survey opened on the 3rd of November and closed on the 5th of January. In that time, there were over 2,000 visits to the project pages and close to 300 surveys completed. Hundreds of clicks on the specific pages and ideas submitted. And also during this period, we issued 5 Get Involved newsletters, specifically on the deal to the 900 residents who are signed up for our Get Involved newsletters. In the survey, we asked them multiple questions. We asked them what they value. We asked them what they most want fixed. We asked residents what they were ready to do to help. We asked them what their barriers were to helping. We asked them what positive outcomes we could expect if we act. And we asked them what they liked about where they lived. We also asked them what frustrated them, and we asked them to describe their lives, all of which gave us really useful insight and feedback, which has helped us shape the deal. Point 5 of the report covers the cross-cutting resources and business scrutiny committee, their activity, and the 8 recommendations are set out for you. We're in the process of responding to the committee, which took place last week, and we're minded to accept all the recommendations. I'd also like to thank our 2 members of the Citizens' Assembly who joined that scrutiny committee, Mr David Thompson and Mrs Elizabeth Aston, and they provided real valuable feedback on their experience, which was really lovely to hear. Item 6 takes you through the implications and risks of the deal. Very few implications. Biggest risk is around the Council's reputation of now not delivering on the deal. Item 7 points to our proposed actions, including working on our next set of community-led case studies, working with partners to deliver a deal volunteering campaign, communicating the deal ways of working via our actions in our delivery plans. There are deal policy reviews. Some have concluded, some are ongoing, and we're working on that deal for business with our business community. We also wish to monitor the mission delivery plans. Item 8 are the recommendations for Cabinet. I'm not sure if you want to take those, Anthony.
Thank you, Neil, for those. The recommendations that Cabinet approves the principles as agreed by the Citizens' Assembly, and that Cabinet approve the Scrutiny Committee recommendations and the next step in the communication engagement strategy. And I would like to commend this report to colleagues. I think there's so much potential in this work if we can get it right and really lean into this with all our might as an organisation and as a leader of place. This emphatically is not about us withdrawing from our responsibilities. Instead, it's about doing more with people and not just to them. And that's our residents and our communities. It's about preventing and not just dealing with consequences. We've long talked about healthy life expectancy, and it's a key part of Marmot, isn't it? How we can get in and address that problem rather than just deal with the consequences of it. And there are great examples of that going on already. If you go I Go group, for example, that shows real follow-through, and I know Fiona will probably want to talk about that as well, and other groups like Couch to 5K, for example, that's about getting people more active and you know, the huge mental and physical benefits that can bring. So we've got the model as well. It's about how we, and our community show that every day as well. It's about how we can empower them to do that better and to do more of that. And it's not just on things like healthy life expectancy, is it? It's on things like the local environment. You know, one of the most impactful things in my ward over the past decade has been the Friends of Fishpond Park group. That's a group that, instead of complaining about the state of the park to the council, have worked with us to improve that park beyond all recognition. And not only is the park therefore in a better shape, but the local community is in a better shape too. People know each other better. They look out for each other. They get together more. So not only have you got an environmental improvement there, but you've got a social improvement in terms of tackling isolation, bringing people together more, and that has huge benefits. You know, in that park, it's no coincidence that we now get a lot less vandalism and damage than we did 10 years ago. That's because people know that that's something owned by the community and valued by the community. So, you know, that's another example. I think of the canal groups as well, you know, Bridge 46 to 5 Locks, who've done brilliant work working with us, giving their own time up to contribute to something they really care about and adding a huge amount of value. And because we've been able to put a canal officer in place, we've not been able to do everything. There's still a lot more work to do. But we've been able to work with that group to move forward. One of the Citizens' Assembly members mentioned, as another example, that he meets up with some friends every week to play five-a-side football. He said before he went to the Citizens' Assembly, he didn't really think about that as social action. It was just a bunch of mates meeting together to play a bit of football once a week. You know, five-a-side football, because if it's anything like me, it's more difficult to get around a full-size pitch when you're into your 40s. But he didn't really think about that as social action. That was just a group getting together. But if that is a group of people getting together, staying fit and active, staying more socially connected, how do we almost lean into that to make sure that that group of people know what else is going on in the community, so that we can help them if any of them have issues, and that they can help the community grow stronger too. So there's real sort of benefits in helping encourage this sort of thing across the community. I want to say a big thank you to everyone who engaged in the citizens' assemblies, 3 Saturdays, which I know isn't easy to give up. A big thank you, first of all, to the staff who helped facilitate that, and to the partner organisations who contributed too. You know, I was really impressed by the Torvine staff, especially in their way of engaging people around the table, not in a corporate and stuffy and institutional way, but in a way of people who are engaged in the communities themselves, who really care about them, and we're talking to other people who really care too. I was really impressed by the Citizens' Assembly members as well. They didn't give us an easy ride, and they were honest. They said what they were frustrated with, but they weren't just critical. Sometimes on social media you only get one part of the jigsaw. Where people are frustrated, they also very often have ideas about how we could work together, and how do we engage in a way that is challenging, but also that recognises at the end of the day we all want what's best for our communities. That sort of critical friend role, I think, is important, and something I hope can be used going forwards. I think we've got the foundations there of something that can be more than just a one-off event, and I know we've committed to getting the Citizens' Assembly back together to look at how things have gone and to get that positive feedback loop going. I think the members who attended scrutiny were fantastic in that respect. As you say, very honest, but also really engaged and enthusiastic about the potential to make a difference. I think the 7 principles are really valuable going forwards, and they should sort of be the things that are carved on the insides of all our eyelids as we work on this. In terms of next steps, first of all, it's that piece about engagement and feedback. I think it's important. We're keen to embed this in our plans going forward and really sort of embed it as a new way of working. And I think there's also a piece of work to be done about, yes, there's lots of fundamental change that we talk about within this, but there's also some quick wins that we can hopefully put in place to show people that we have listened to. Some of the ideas that the Citizens' Assembly came up with, for example, weren't, things that will change the dial, but, were logical things that are thought about from a different perspective. It's very easy, isn't it, for all organisations to think about things as the deliverer of services, not as the recipients, not as part of the community, not as people working with us. The piece about barriers, I think, is really interesting. What are the barriers that stop people getting involved, and how do we remove those? But yeah, with some of them, I think there's some quick wins that we can use, not only to get quick wins that benefit the community, but also to show that we're serious about this. This isn't just window dressing. So really appreciate the work that's gone into this, and just commend the report to colleagues. Any questions before we move to the recommendations? Dave, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I was pleased to hear that the Assembly is going to reconvene in a year's time, because I think that it's a fantastic initiative, and I think we do need to have longevity in it that we haven't previously seen with other consultations, and it obviously goes much beyond consultation. But I wonder whether it would be possible to revisit more regularly. So I don't know, on an annual basis, for the next 3-5 years or whatnot, just to kind of check in and see how we're progressing against that deal. Because, as I've said, I think there is a kind of an expectation amongst the public that we, and it's by no means exclusive to us. I think it's any public body. We get the consultation that we need, and then perhaps don't revisit it in the future, and they don't get the feedback. So I think it would be good to break that mould, and we certainly are, by the sounds of it, by coming back next year. But it'd be good to kind of sustain it beyond that as well. My other point is just, I'm really enthused by the deal, quite honestly, because it's it plays to strengths we've seen, as Anthony's reference, we've seen plenty of examples of residents out there in the community who've seen a challenge or a problem and kind of gone that step further and thought, right, I can actually play my part, I can pitch in and do my bit. I think the instinct to kind of harness that is the direction that we should be going in, because yeah, there's a lot of experience out there and a lot of will to do something about problems rather than just to kind of acknowledge them and do nothing more. And, you know, as a council, we've got a lot of difficult issues which we deal with on like an annual basis. They're a perpetual issue. They're, you know, no means, you know, specific to Torvine. You know, they are present in councils across the country. Social care, education, you know, recycling. These are all issues that we grapple with, challenges that we grapple with. So the instinct to share that challenge with the public and bring people into the problem with a view to harnessing them to help them find a solution is an instinct I definitely share, and I'm really is a strong aspect to this deal, I think. So just to commend really the officers who've been driving this, and you know, and just give my support really. Thank you.
Thanks, David. And there's some ideas there about future engagement I think we can take forward. Certainly, you mentioned I guess the difference between what I consider engagement and consultation. And the great benefit, I think, of the Citizens' Assembly is that the way it was constructed, very often when we consult on something, you get people with a particular perspective or particularly interested in an issue. So, for example, on the budget this year, because there was no sort of big headline-grabbing service closure, you don't get as much engagement when you consult. But if you do, it's from that perspective, whereas these were people coming in with no particular preconceived ideas or agenda. They just wanted to help us, you know, do something better for the borough, and I think that is why I think it works really well. Yeah. Okay. Are we happy then to move to the recommendations? So, with you, Neil. So, firstly, that Cabinet approve the principles of the deal as agreed by the Citizens' Assembly, and secondly, that Cabinet approve the Scrutiny Committee recommendations and the next steps in the deal's communication and engagement strategy. Show of hands. That's carried, and again, thank you, officers, for your hard work on this, and to the members of the Citizens' Panel and scrutiny members. Okay. That brings us then to the next item on the agenda, which is the exclusion of press and public. This is to agree the exclusion of press and public from the meeting, as the report following is not in public for publication, because in accordance with paragraph 14 of Section Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, it contains information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, and the public interest in maintaining the exemptions outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Can I have a show of hands in favour? That's unanimous. It's carried. So we then move into closed session.